Welcome to Elements of Community, a podcast about discovering and exploring the elements of community. I am Lucas Root, and each week we talk with a community leader about what makes their community thrive and bring value to both the leaders and the members. Join me as we unpack the magic of the elements of community. We're live. Roran, thank you so much for joining. For those of you who don't know, Roran has been becoming one of my very good friends over the last 6 months or so because we met inside the community put together by Marusha Murphy, who was on the show about 6 months ago. And the community is called the Revolutionaries. Roran, thank you for getting to know me and for hanging out with me and for, banging big ideas back and forth over the last several months. And also, thanks for introducing me to Guanxi.
Yeah.
And for agreeing to come on.
Thank you for having me. Yes, it is lots of fun. We're expecting like a typical 1 hour get to know each other conversation and ended up in like a 1.5 hour deep dive of the human evolution. And I was like, there's finally another human that gets my brain. And when we first met, Marusha was like, Roran, you need to talk to Lucas. Like, your nerdiness of extreme human evolution, he is on the same brainwave as you. And I was like, yes. And then it continued. So it was wonderful. Yeah, it's really fun because it's like, one of the things that I talked about is like, I can see as someone that is really deeply in the trends world, especially people don't realize this my background is social media and digital marketing, and people were like, oh, that's fun, you're just creative. And I was like, no, social media is a direct reflection of human society. And when I look at trends and analytics, I'm looking at the trends and analytics of human evolution, which as a history nerd is like my jam. I'm like being paid to do it in real time. And so it's really fun in that space. And then being able to have someone like Lucas to be able to nerd out about is fantastic. So Lucas was like, I want to have our nerdiness on a podcast just so that other people that are equally interested in the human evolution nerdiness can partake. So I was like, all right, I'm here. Let's go.
That's right. I didn't realize it, but I built this podcast 1.5 years ago just for this conversation.
Aw, that's so cute. I love it. It's like everything happens and unfolds at the perfect time and perfect place, as the saying goes. Yeah. Yes, I'm sure that is a meditation quote somewhere in the many things of combat. So I'm not going to take credit for that quote, but yes.
You know what? It's probably Rumi.
Probably. That human is a very deep, old soul of a human that just sees the world. Yes. Yeah. Yes. We love it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, you were, you and I know each other fairly well. You were saying in the green room that you're in several different communities.
Yes.
Like me.
So... Yes. We're like, the joke is like, I'm an insider where I get to go into different groups because, like, if you think about it, Lucas, when we were growing up, it was clique based, right? Like, think like early 2000s, hyper clique. Like, you must belong in a clique. And I remember growing up being like, I never belonged in any single clique. And that's the reality of being human beings, is that we're multivariants. So we have multiple different interests in multiple different groups. And my background, for those of you that don't know me, I am Roran. I'm a human-centered marketing and business advisor. And my real day-to-day life is, like I mentioned, being a nerd about this ever-changing human algorithm, but also at the same time, really looking at just how human beings evolve in this space of innovation and business. And what I do today is work with clients at that very deep level of creating an environment that allows their human creative geniuses arrive and thrive and create the next innovation for their company. And that's what I do on the day-to-day. And that has evolved over the years of being a speaker, a to create the next evolution for me, it's funny that you were talking about human evolution and our personal evolutions. My next evolution is creating a community called Humans Behind the Brand, because the philosophy is that in order to do human-centered business and really connect at the human level, because people do business with people, not just business, we have to honor the human beings behind the brand. And that includes ourselves as business owners, but also very specifically our team. And so Human Behind the Brand is a community that allows creatives, marketers, content creators, all the people that make the brand come to life, have a place to gather, nerd, and grow as a human being along the way. So it is going live hopefully by the end of this month as we're filming. So it'll go live as it becomes, and I'm excited because being a marketer in this world is a very lonely road. So you're usually the solo superhero human on your team, and up until this point, it's like all the in-person mega conferences where your brain gets crammed with way too much information in 3 days, and sometimes you have passive communities on like Facebook, etc. There's not really like a community to just grow and be human-centered. So this community is designed to be where I get to host a space for that. But yeah, that's
I love it.
The evolution. Yeah.
I'm right there with you too. I was growing up like you. We were growing up. We're talking about it now, right? I was growing up, and one of my friends was sitting in a classroom, and the teacher, looked out at the class and said, "Hey, who can tell me where beef comes from?" And this is not a joke. I grew up in the backwoods of Vermont, and one of my friends sitting next to me said the supermarket and meant it. And here we are in the backwoods of Vermont, where you would expect them to actually know better. And he said the supermarket, and he meant it. Like, that's where beef comes from, the supermarket.
So completely disengaged from the whole entire supply stream and like how everything is interconnected. I mean, we're talking, our intention of the theme today is talk about Guanxi, and I want to give a very like Western, modern, tactical view of it. Is from the time you wake up till the time you go to sleep, or like within the first hour, you actually interact with at least 20 separate different companies in ways of like from your electricity, your water, the air conditioning, all the things you've interacted with so many different things. And those all are business relationships. Like, people don't expect to have a business relationship or a relationship in general with their energy company. But I'm in Texas right now with like 100+ heat weather. I am very aware of Austrian Energy and what they put out there and the way that they communicate things like power outages and stuff like that, and how they've done it, and like the nuance of how they handle that conversation builds trust at the end of, and that's the point of it. It's not about points of connection, is how trust is being built for it. So yeah, yes, and that's the measurement of success in business. Yeah. But
what it illustrates is, beef comes from the supermarket. Or one of my favorite analogies around this conversation is, how do you make a pencil? And the illustration is that what we've done is amazing. We've created an absolutely extraordinary machine that makes it so easy for us to have the things that we want. The picture that's right here on the back of my wall, or the couch. Those are hard things to have. I can't make a couch in a day. Like, I don't have the skills for it. I don't have the material for it. And yet, in a day's worth of labor wages, I can purchase a couch that cost me a day of work, because we built this absolutely extraordinary machine. And one of the unintended side effects of that machine that we've created, that gives me the capacity to have anything I want, anytime I want, for the most part, even delivered to me, is that it takes all of those relationships and makes them faceless. And so we're more connected than we ever have been before.
The more lonely than we've ever been before.
Yeah.
People are like, well, we're all connected on social media. And I was like, social media is just a reminder of connection. It is like
exactly
literally
right.
Someone saying hi bye across the room from you. It's like, hello, goodbye. And that is it. There's no nuance. There's no conversation. None of that stuff. There's DMs, like private one-to-one messaging. You might have a side conversation in the common threads, but that is equivalent to like you guys are waiting in line for coffee and you have a random 5-minute conversation that like that's not deep at all in any single way. And so it's the people feel lonelier than ever, and it's been put on a big stage like that. It was highlighted so much because of the pandemic, of the loneliness that people occur to. And then that brings forth the question of like, well, is it depth of the relationship or quantity of relationships? Because social media has again highlighted and basically congratulated the concept of gaining a lot of followers, aka quantity of relationships, but they're all surface level. There's literally no brand loyalty at all. And if we're switching the expectation that success is not money and material gains that you make in the world, but impact and legacy and trust that you build in the world, then that follower count is useless.
Completely.
Yeah.
It's completely useless. It's funny. I connected with somebody on LinkedIn the other day, and when I connect with people on LinkedIn, the first thing that I try to do is set up a Zoom coffee date. And, I call it various different versions of that, but really I just want to sit down and get to know you at one level of intimacy closer than the vanity metric of +1 on my LinkedIn follower count.
Absolutely, because social media is not about like building connections. It's literally a reminder. How I explain to clients is like social media is the top of funnel and bottom of funnel. It is literally designed for you to remain top of mind. You catch their attention when you do expansion style content that goes onto like the For You page, etc. Again, entertainment. These apps are entertainment apps. So you're just landing on someone's feed for entertainment value. And then they like you and they follow you, but you have to turn them into a fan of your show. Yep. And social media is designed to continue warming that. But like,
that's it.
What is the in between? Like if we're looking at the hourglass, right? If they're going and funnel in, go and funnel out, it's not just land and be my follower on social media. It's like there's an engagement point at the middle of the hourglass experience, right? And so for shows, it's like go actually watch the show, go actually watch the movie, listen to the music, get to look at longer form content, which is literally like click watch. So very low barrier of entry. And then for businesses, it could be experience the service, experience the product, and experience the community. Yeah. And all of that applies.
Buy the course.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But it's more of like not just like buying and consuming products, it's the experience of that, right? Like diehard Harry Potter fans are like diehard Harry Potter fans despite the whole J.K. Rowling issue, etc. Like it's a fandom, true to where like I just saw trending on TikTok a lady who completely made a Harry Potter themed realistic birthday party. Like she made custom made wands for her kids. Oh, cool. And her kids like attendees. She made an owl, like a legit life-size owl out of a cake. I mean, she works in that background as a props artist. I think that's her background. But I was just like, that level of fandom exists in a movie that has been out for over 20 plus years. Like it was out when I was in 4th grade, but it has managed to create this legacy because the books
several years before that.
Exactly. And the reason why brands like that are so powerful is not because of just the experience of the book or the movie. It's the friendships people have building because they watched it together.
Yep.
That's what makes it so powerful, is that common interest in the fandom.
Yep.
And that's when we talk about like community of like what's a good community versus not a good community, is when a community is powerful when the host has empowered the attendees of their community members to interact with each other. That's the measurement of success.
When a host has empowered the community to self-interaction.
Exactly. Yes, it's not a me show. It's a how do we interact with each other and build something. That's a true powerhouse. Like, think of your favorite party. Like, if you go to any parties, I mean, we're both introverts, so it's not really easy for us to go to parties. But like, think of like a party that you went to where you left feeling very energetically invigorated, like you were excited, right? Like you had solid interactions out of there, and it wasn't like you probably went to the party because the host invited you and you're like, okay, I know this person, but then you left making friends, right? That's what going into a community feels like. Is I get invited to a party. Should feel like in theory. Yes, in theory should feel like, right? There's a lot of that, and so it's like, how do you create and garner that? Like, as brands and developers of brands, we play the multiple hats. We are the event host and the host of the party, as much as the like talking head dictating that space. Like, we are creating the lifeblood content that is discussed, as much as creating the experience for the content
in the content, real time. Yep.
Yeah, like that's like the Western sphere of what is evolving. And I think if you're listening to this, if you're a viewer following Lucas for a long time, you probably already got the memo that success is not based on materialistic gains, but based on legacy and impact. But if you're watching this for the first time, let's really reiterate this, is that what counts as a loving and fulfilling and successful life is not how much money you have in the bank or power or market share. It's about what is the trust and lasting impact that you're creating in the world, right? And that's like, and that is a concept that's been around for thousands of years, before money was a thing, right? Because that's how people were comfortable with trading in the beginning of civilization, right? Like money, like coins didn't exist, currency didn't exist for a long time in evolution. So, which is trust. Right, and we're slowly, like to your point earlier of like, we have everything so easily accessible where there's a saturation. So now it's like basic survival access things no longer matter. It's about what we truly care about.
Beef comes from the supermarket.
Yes.
Now, me personally, I've taken that concept and turned it on its head. I personally have a direct relationship with the farmer that raises the cows that I eat. So much so that I actually go meet the cows a couple of times a year, sometimes as often as once a month, because I consider that to be an important part of me feeding into, unintended, feeding into the supply chain that feeds me.
Yeah. But if you think about that, like that's for normal humans, and I say this because you and I are probably fall from the category of being naturally entrepreneurs. We get labeled as superhumans just because we've naturally done things not normal of the past. But like, if we're talking about this, it's like, I don't want that concept to just be considered like, oh, it's a superhuman act, it's an outlier act. And I was like, anybody can do it. And I could hear, like, if someone heard you say that, they're like, that's great, but I have to do that for all of the companies that I interact with. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
And I was like, right.
No,
I was like,
don't.
well, you don't. It's the same thing of like when we talk about social justice for companies and brands, right? Like so many people are like, companies need to be more socially aware. And they have a voice. They need to say something. And I was like, okay, well, just like how we don't expect any human in general to like do everything all at once because there's just no capacity or bandwidth to that. Why are we expecting these companies to do the same? And it's all about progress at the end of the day. So it's that question of like, instead of spreading ourselves thin and only like hitting bare surface, what if they focus on the things that we actually care about? So like, in Lucas's case, he cared about like how he's feeding himself and in turn feeding the environment. And that's something that you're nerdy and passionate about. What is something that like for a listener what is something that you're passionate about? Like, I'm super passionate about plastic and recycling and things like that. And because I live in Texas, and I am very lucky that I live in Austin, where we have good recycling systems and certain areas have composting. And then I go out to East Texas and there's no recycling. And I'm like just crying inside. And I come out of like, I lived in multiple different countries, both in Europe and Asia and here. And I lived in Korea and Japan, where it's like 12 styles of recycling, like ultimate use of like, they import trash from other countries because they don't have enough to field the way that their systems are done. And then I come here and I'm like, why is it so hard to figure out what I can or cannot recycle? So one of the things that I did was like, okay, if I can't consciously be confident in how things are being recycled in the system out there, I can at least control my purchasing style. So if I historically use a ton of paper towels, I switch to towels. And then my trash like decreased. And I'm going to go a little bit more feminine. I switched into using period cup, menstrual cups, versus traditional tampons, which for any woman out there who's questioning on it, you save hundreds of dollars. I have saved at least probably close to $1,000 now in the last 5 years of adoption that I've switched over. And you never have that moment of, shoot, I have to go to the store to buy tampons. Like, as a female, that's awesome. And that stuff is not recyclable in any single way. It goes straight into the landfill. You are screwed at that point. So it's like these little points, but it's like, it's something that I'm genuinely interested in. And I think for every human being who's trying to adapt or evolve and change for the better of humanity, it's about start with your interests and then branch out. Because even if you start there, it's better. Exactly. And just being aware. I think the biggest thing that came out of that earlier conversation of beef from the supermarket is, like, to your point, they're just not aware of the intricacies of it. I think people are starting to slowly be aware of the intricacies, like the supply chain. Like, everybody's like, everything is more expensive. And I was like, welcome to trade wars fueled by gas. Which then makes, and then I was like, let's actually question how inefficient our distribution systems could be.
Right?
Like, we get avocados from Mexico, and then we get this from like another state 20,000 miles away, and I'm like, eat locally, eat seasonally. Like,
it is very cool that we have avocados from Mexico available in our grocery store all the time. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's insane oversaturation, though. Like, I have friends that I used to have a lot of friends from Japan, because in my university, we had a sister city in Japan, and I was part of their exchange system program. And so I just remember distinctly one of my friends coming to the US for the first time, and we went into the bread aisle, and there was like 30 different versions of bread, and she was just like, I've never seen this much. And she's coming out of Japan, and that is like product marketing central. And she was even shocked. And then my nerdiness was like, okay, let me compare like the variations. Like, even in Japan, in like their most common form, they don't have the level of saturation as we do. They have really genius product marketing, but like they only have like 10, maybe 20 versions of something, whereas we have like 30 to 50 versions of something instead.
Yeah, go down the cereal aisle.
Oh God. I mean, I appreciate it. I have
many different ways
diabetic friendly cereal. Right? Yeah. I mean, like, I appreciate it, right? Like, I have diabetic friendly cereal that's now available to me, although it costs like triple the price of my favorite thing. But like, and then we question, why do we eat cereal? But that's a whole other kettle of fish.
We can go there if you want.
I'm
there with it.
That is like a lot of if people are interested in a part 2 of questioning why we have so much things, that could be a second episode. If the viewers are interested, we can go down that route. But everything is interconnected, and I feel like people don't recognize the interconnectedness, and they take it for granted. a lot
Yeah.
of the things
Yeah.
that happen.
This amazing machine that gives me anything I want whenever I want, right here at my doorstep, and is
On
faceless.
steroids. Like, look at Temu, Shein. There's a lot of ethical problems in association to why that is so cheap. But that aside, like, that is like capitalism on steroids.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It is. But
And it's
also, like,
faceless.
and it's faceless. Well, I invite you to look at, there's a, if you ever get a chance, you could look at the Swoop documentary on Shein.
Mhm.
I think I sent you the link for it. There's a reason why, because you can always, the reason why it's faceless points back to the intention of the owner.
Yes, that's part of it. And it's a part we shouldn't ignore, but another part of it is, how do you make a pencil? Like, the paint for a pencil comes from Vietnam, and the graphite comes from Afghanistan, and the wood comes from South Africa, and all of that, plus the rubber, which comes from South America, all of that needs to be shipped to Taiwan, where they're all assembled into a pencil, and then they're shipped here. It's not even practical for it not to be faceless.
Yeah, because
there's so many moving parts. It is actually impractical for it to not be faceless.
Right. Well, there's also a difference of, like, there's like one single pencil coming from the Taiwan manufacturer then gets rebranded into 20 separate brands.
Well, that too.
There's also that point too, right? So there is like literally no tracking at all. But all of that is like classic industrial era thinking. Like, the reason why it's faceless is because it was designed in the industrial era.
But
whereas
my beef is no longer faceless.
True.
Not
you
me.
Get to talk to. Yes. And I mean, like, my eggs are no longer faceless. We buy like the really fancy eggs because my husband went down the research realm of like omega-3 eggs. So we use the specific brand, and they literally in every box has a hen of the week. Like, as Peggy loves to run around in the sun, like full on descriptor, which from a marketer, I was like, I appreciate, but this is cringy.
Yeah.
But it builds brand trust and loyalty, right? And so it's like, it's a difference of that. But it's also interesting to think about like how much trust it took to build that, because yes, while it is faceless, it is massively powerful. Like, think of the volume of materials that goes in the amount of dollars. That's $1 trillion industry, at least.
Yeah, it's amazing.
In that space, yeah.
Tell me about Guanxi.
Right. Well, it's actually funny that it's a great segue into talking about Guanxi, because
it's almost like we planned. No.
We eventually tangent our way back into the topic at hand. If you think about the weight of impact built in these business deals, Guanxi plays a huge amount of role. So Guanxi is, in Chinese, the concept of relationships. And when you deal with collectivist countries like China and different places, like, relationships is the key. It is about how you build trust. Like, there is a saying in Chinese culture, you don't make a business deal with someone unless you eat dinner with them 5 times, because you have to get to know about them and all the things. And if you think about it in concept of like these deals that ended up where the manufacturers in Taiwan, that took at least 5 to 20 meals, because that's $1 trillion deal that is being decided over. It can't be done in 2 sales calls. People need to know them and trust them, because it's shifting and building a whole industry infrastructure. Like, think of the millions of lives affected by this, not just as consumers, but the employees, which is the most important factor, because we are humans, we are consumers as much as we are employees. And that is the factor. So Guanxi is huge in the sense that Guanxi in English means relationship. And the reason how we got onto the subject of Guanxi is because we were talking about the meaning of humanity. And I was like, English does not have a sufficient enough word to describe the meaning of connected humanity, quite like the way that you could hear it in like a 4,000-year history language. Like, If we need it in English, we go to Latin, which is the historical marker, to give the depth that is there.
Yeah.
And in Guanxi, it literally translates to the threads that uniquely combine everything together. It is the social ties and threads, and it basically says everybody is uniquely connected. And it really came from Guanxi, which is going back to Confucian, and I'm looking to the side. So basically, from Confucianism, it's a human being's identity comes from both who they are, but also who they are in relationship to others. Now, in Confucianism, it literally boiled it down to you are the saying that you are the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. That saying that's what it boils down to, which applies in collectivist thinking because it's the individual is not important in the collectivist world, but it's a combination. Individualism and collectivism, there's not one is better than the other. It's actually a combination of both. It is what really it boils down to is what we talked about earlier, which is how we as an individual is contributing to our society through the relationships that we are building with our friends, our family, our business, and everything in between. And that would be a more modern take on Guanxi today, using both an individualistic lens and a collectivist lens. If you use Guanxi, to recap in Cliff Notes, if you're looking at Guanxi from a collectivist standpoint and viewpoint, it is you are the average of the 5 people around you. But if you take away an otherism formatting, which is collectivism versus individualism, and you just purely look at it from a humanity perspective, it is about how an individual is contributing to the greater good overall at that point. So that is Guanxi in a nutshell. And we've talked a little bit up to this point about how it shows up in the Western world, all the way that you touch. A single decision of having a direct relationship with your beef provider or deciding to purchase from a smaller good company is huge.
Yeah.
Small businesses in the US is actually what drives the economy, not the $1 trillion businesses.
Yeah. Well,
but everybody only talks about the $1 trillion businesses.
Let's pull in a different version of this and tie it together to something that we can collectively really anchor the idea with. So Joseph Goebbels was the brilliant, horrible psychologist and master marketer of the Nazi Party.
In World War II, I'm here for it because I'm a World War II nerd. Yeah.
I love this. But I love it for a reason that's not immediately obvious, although anybody who's a veteran of mine already knows where this is going. What Goebbels said in German effectively was, if you tell a lie loud enough, often enough, it becomes the truth.
Inception.
He was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. And he went and proved that this is indeed true. And what I took from that, me personally, what I've taken from that as an adult, as a child, I learned different things, right? But what I took from that as an adult is that we cannot step away from collectivism. We cannot divorce ourselves from those 5 people closest to us. There must be 5 people closest to us, and that's a part of our identity. And there's no version of me separate from those 5 people closest to us in isolation.
No, I think it's more of it's a combination, right? Going back to my earlier saying, human beings are multivariant.
That's right.
And so you are equally in connection. If I asked you to describe yourself, if I describe myself, I'm Roran, I'm an entrepreneur, which puts me into one community. I am a wife, and which is to my nuclear family. I am a friend to some of my closest friends in that space. So there are multiple things. I'm also a K-pop fan, which puts me, or specifically a Mamamoo fan, which puts me in a very specific fandom and that space, right? There's also all these different things that falls into it and that feeds into who we are. But all of that is tied to that is just how our rainbow shows up out into the world. I always like to say every human being has a light inside of them, and then how it shows up tactically is the rainbow, of which we do, right? And so, like, think of Oprah. Oprah owns Oprah 50 Things. Richard Branson owns Virgin 50 different things, right? Like, they are equally themselves as much as a collective version of all those things.
But the point is, it's neither in isolation. So you can't be collectivist isolated from individual, and you can't be individualist isolated from collective. It actually like our safe, healthy existence requires both of them in balance.
Right, exactly. So, and I take it to the next level of saying, like, instead of saying that you need both, it's just like, how about we just take those descriptors out of the equation?
Yeah.
And just saying, at a human level, you need to be clear in how you're contributing into the world and your intention in how you contribute to the world. And unhear and listen from others in your evolution, right? Like, so again, like, you can't be like, I'm all about evolving myself, nobody's opinion matters, because that's how World War II actually probably started, if we really think about it.
How it happened.
Yeah, that's like, if you really look at the mental health of the Nazi party leaders, that is quite literally what happened. And they're like, well, they're in the collectivists. They averaged themselves with other sociopaths. So it was literally an oligarchy of sociopaths and psychopaths, which relevated into that. And I was like, yes. And this is also why we say culture problems don't happen because of the culture and environment as a whole. It happens because leadership needs therapy, because they're not ready to face the different things that happen in there, right?
Wow. George Washington said anyone qualified to take the job would probably say no to it.
Accurate. Like I said, being an entrepreneur or leader is definitely not for the faint of heart. It's not. It is not. Being an entrepreneur is definitely not for the faint of heart. Every human being has the capability to be a leader in their own right. Doesn't mean you have to be a CEO. It doesn't mean that you have to be an executive. You can actually be a leader in your own right, because the definition of a leader is someone who inspires others to own their own power. Yeah. Which is very different from managers.
Yeah.
That's a totally different thing. Managers manage people. Leaders inspire people.
So take the facelessness one step further. I don't think that managers manage people. I think managers manage tasks, and there are people who complete those tasks.
Correct. Managers manage the end goal versus leaders observe progress in humans. And so leaders are designed, they nurture it. Goes back to that example of being a host of a community, right? They inspire innovation, and it literally starts with realizing that they can't be the answer to everything. Mm-hmm. That's like step number one. And realizing that in human creativity and collaboration is where innovation thrives.
Yeah.
That's like the big part of it. But that starts with trust, right? So like if there's like one big cliff note that I would leave people with, is that the definition of power and success in this world is the trust. Again, the Guanxi that is built, because it's all threads. You either literally are hanging by a thread, or you have a very strong rope, iron chain link, something. Like, think of like the gold strands. There's actually a concept of emotional strands, which is about energy use, which is a whole other kettle of fish, but people are built on connections of that thread, and that connection is equal, right? Like, you hold one end and I hold another end.
Yep.
That should be the proper way of creating a relationship versus power dynamics.
Yep.
Yeah. No one should have a hook inside of you. And if you have a curiosity what that means in power dynamics, I suggest people go watch the Colleen Ballinger. That's a clear example of threads in power dynamics.
Yeah.
In a very scary way, because her audience are kids. Like, people get all caught up in like, oh my god, she's like grooming them for sexual stuff, and I was like, it's about power. It's not about how she did it. How she did it, absolutely horrible, but it's power. World War II, very deplorable ways, but it was all about power.
Yep.
If you hear the manifesto of Hitler, it's about power. His end goal and intention is power. And he just decided to choose the worst ways in humanity to do it.
Yes. And you should read it.
Yes. You should. There's a reason why it exists. There's a reason why it's not banned.
Yeah.
People are like, why is this still available? It should be censored, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, if you actually go into a library and look at the manifesto, they actually have the manifesto, and there are a lot of the published works are, here's the Hitler manifesto, and then here are all the historical notes on the side. So it shows you the intention of the published work that's available of the Hitler manifesto book is designed to be a historical lesson so we don't forget.
Yeah.
And that's the published work that's available now. A lot of people are like, oh, it should be censored because we're afraid of neo-Nazis. And I'm like, well, those will be used in anyway, but for the greater public, they need to know.
Well, we
otherwise
are forgetting.
They won't realize it. Yeah.
That's why you and I are having a conversation about Guanxi.
Yes, because I'm like, yeah, like, because it's like, again, like, if you are lonely, that means that you have not had a chance to invest in deep relationships. And if we point it back to the biggest lesson that we learned from the pandemic, which is there's a chance of not existing in 72 hours, because that's how deadly COVID was, what would you regret? And most humans regret the time that they didn't spend with others.
Yeah.
They don't regret not making enough money, etc., etc. They regret not spending enough time with others. Even the most powerful people making the biggest amount of impact probably regret not spending enough time with others because they hustled and grinded their way into that. Yep.
So what's the opposite of louder and more frequent? So let's say somebody is saying something, even if it's not a lie. Let's say somebody is effectively filling the air around you with the same message over and over again. How do you step into a version of truth that's different from that noise?
Critical thinking. I mean, people are, I always say, if people are willing to be a little bit more compassionate.
I'm going to tease you because the answer is Guanxi.
Oh, like trust? Like
the answer is Guanxi. If you're surrounded by loud noise, the path forward is for you to get tighter, not inside yourself, but inside your community. Bring in the closest relationships and work to maintain the version of reality that's important to you inside those close relationships. So you with your husband, you with me, you with the revolutionaries.
Right. That is, if we factor in the variable that if that person who seeks this advice is actually hosting healthy relationships.
So we must.
Right. Most humans don't know how to foster healthy boundaries in relationships.
Well, that's why we're having...
Yeah. Like boundaries, again, so what I talked about, it's like equal. So to your point, I agree. If someone is understanding of how to foster that emotional strand, so if we use that emotional strand analogy where you and I are equally holding both ends, no one is holding a hook into another, then it makes sense. So like if there's a lot of noise and you feel untethered, you look at yourself and you're equally holding your end and then building a relationship with the other person that you're holding on, that makes sense. But if there's a power dynamic difference, if someone has bad boundaries, and the stealthiest one is a family member that you grew up with, and then they lost their privilege to be on your 1 inch by 1 inch advisory council, aka that close niche list, you have to make that decision to decide if you want them on that list or not. It is a privilege for someone to be on that 1 inch by 1 inch list. And if those of you are listening, hearing that lingo for the first time, it is coined by Brene Brown. She literally says you have 1 inch by 1 inch list. Like, that is a tiny little thing of paper. There are only so many names that exist on that paper, and no one has direct access into that. Not your parents, not your husband or wife, not your significant other, no one, not even God or whatever you believe.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm saying that, I'm calling that, not even religion, because usually religion is dictated by a messenger, and that is another human being that may or may not have privilege.
Yeah.
Now, how you perceive the actual written text is different. But yes, not everyone has privilege to that. Now, yeah, so to your point, like, to get out of the noise, being very intentionally clear of who you add into that is huge. And to my earlier point of critical thinking is always being open to new ideas. AKA, when I say critical thinking, it's like in the back of our brains, there's that filter of relevant information and not relevant information. People need to be able to know how to use that muscle properly.
I like it.
Boundaries. Everything starts with boundaries. I mean, that's what builds a very powerful relationship. A Guanxi is boundaries.
First, we don't do any business until we've had dinner 5 times. Like, that's the first boundary.
Yeah. That's a filter. It's a filter. It's a boundary. It's designed to test people and assess if we align in correct expectations. Because if we when we build a relationship, there's trust, and that trust is a privilege to be earned.
Yeah.
And it's more of like, I think back to legal days of like, if shit hits the fan, excuse me for my French, but if shit hits the fan, then can you trust that person is going to do what they say? Because adversity and challenges will always appear. Can you trust that person in good faith to do that?
Yeah.
Right? So, the same thing applies for interviews. I feel like people go through this very transactional experience of interviewing someone to work under them or work with them. And I'm like, yeah, like, think about it. It's very transactional. And I'm like, but why?
I've never thought about it this way.
Yeah. Like, it's so like transactional in the recruiting world, but I'm like, if this is your business, babe, so like say you're a business owner and you're hiring like your first 20, your first 40, right? Like, this is your baby. And you're bringing some aunties and uncles who are going to be helping you nurture this baby. Are you going to, like, do you trust them to do that?
Right.
That's why the interview process should be intentional.
And some of them you're going to spend as much time with every day as you do with your spouse.
Exactly. So, like, can you actually handle them? And it's also, again, based on your mental health prowess, right? Because culture problems exist because leadership needs therapy, as the saying goes. And so it's like, if you heard us say that and your instant reaction is, okay, well, I'm going to hire people that I vibe with and not hire people that I contradict with, then that is a reflection of your mental capacity for change.
Listen, I have a difference of opinion with my wife at least once a day.
My husband is my opposite, and he's so intentionally like set and like confident in who he is. And half my life, as I'm an anxious little being, I sound very confident and I come across very confident, but I grew up being a very highly vigilant anxiety survival being coming out of my background in depression, and that's why I come across as confident. But he's just content and thriving. And my goal in life is like, how did you do that? And then how do we replicate it for our future kids so they don't go down my route and go more your route, right? Like, how do I reduce the suffering for my future children? Like, that is my goal in life.
Yeah. I love.
And that's, we're different, but we're also like at the same time.
Yeah.
That's kind of the beauty of it.
And you have your difference of opinion. You have your disagreements, and like, you work through it.
Right. And then,
all the time.
Yes. And what gets created is way more powerful.
Yeah.
At that point too. Yes. But that
and
requires...
you've had dinner more than 5 times.
Exactly. Definitely.
Started with...
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's saying it's okay to do that. Like, I feel like we live in such an insane hustle and grind environment that there's this like rush to form something. And I'm like, relationships and progress and change doesn't happen overnight. Rome doesn't get built overnight. Like, the creation of the pencil and the easy accessibility of the pencil is 100 years. Yeah.
It's 100 years old, and it took decades to get there.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like people only think in like 2-year time frames at most in the US.
At best.
At best. Yeah. Whereas in Asian culture, it's like we think in 100-year impacts. We think 25-year goals. We think those, and it's not like we're tied to those longer impacts. Here's our general direction. That's basically like, here's the X marks the spot, and then it'll take us like 20,000 winding pathways to get there. And that's okay, right? Like, that's like the things that we're tied to is our short-term goals. And I even notice like companies who are like, these are our goals, but we're constantly in review. A lot of people also think like, create the goal and set the goal and stay forever to the goal. And as a J in Myers-Briggs, I 100% get that. And I also 100% get the anxiety that comes with not being able to hit that. And what I find really powerful in older countries and brands, like Toyota does this really well, is like they have a goal, they have a system, but they were always okay to say stop, and always okay to call pause to say stop, to adjust and tweak. Yep. And I think that's really powerful to learn from. And that's like, Guanxi is about like building relationships, and they do it, but it's like constant relationships, right? Like the US is like 1 or 2 sales meetings, done, make the experience and never come back again. And I'm like, did you just waste money on getting that customer to come through? Like, get them. The value of a customer should actually be that the customer is making you money. Right? Like, think about cost of acquisition. And if people have been listening and they're like still not convinced on Guanxi and the concept of Guanxi, let me put it in very tactical Western marketing number terms. Guanxi, and focusing on human-centered marketing or anything like that with that lens, is the way to make your brand resilient and reduce your costs, because there's cost of acquisition in getting a customer through the door. So say, for example, you spend $600 and a vendor. All things.
And an
so let's say, exactly, all of the above, right? There's cost to all of that. So let's say hypothetically you have $600 to get a customer through the door. If you do the typical hustle and grind, 2 sales calls, never touch on them again, you just wasted $600 and you never got anything from it. Like, if it costs you $600, they spend $1,000, you make $400 profit. But if you never rebuild that continuous Guanxi or relationship with them, or even think about it through that lens, you only get $400 from them. But if you focus on rebuilding that relationship, they come back again and again. So that builds, and they bring a friend, which is the free, most powerful, and brand resilient form of marketing ever. And that's actually how businesses build. There's a reason why there are hole-in-the-wall restaurants that do 0 marketing. Word of mouth.
Bring a friend.
Bring a friend.
Yep. My experience was so good that the next time I go, I can't go without sharing this with somebody. My wife, my best friend. I have to share it.
Exactly. And so that customer goes from a $400 profit to maybe each time you're making like $1,000, because you have now done that, and they bring a friend, which then gives you another $1,000. So their value just goes from a $2,000. So that becomes an infinite amount. You shouldn't be spending more advertising dollars each year and year as you build your brand. Like, there should not be that. Otherwise you hit a plateau and you get diminishing returns.
Yep.
Yes.
And it happens at about $3,000 a month, by the way.
Yes,
case you're all wondering.
Yeah, it is $3,000. I did $600 for easy math, but it is usually more than that. Yes.
Yep.
But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
I like to close my interviews with 3 questions. The first is, for the people who have been inspired by you, what's the one best way they can find you?
They can find me on any social media platform, or they can go to rxuconsulting.com and they can follow me on there, sign up for my newsletter, rxuconsulting.com. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Second question. This is a curveball. What is the one question you wish I had asked?
Maybe what is the one step a human being can take to start activating Guanxi? Because I feel like our conversation has been about explaining why Guanxi matters, which honestly has been the thesis of the last 3 years. Is like, why does it matter to humanize humanity? But yes.
It's a fascinating conversation. Like, it never occurred to me that when I grew up, I'd be trying to tell people how to human better.
Yes, because we take it for granted. Yeah. Well, it's like the beef in supermarket, right? Never in a million years will we have to explain, like, yeah, you should have a relationship with who you purchase from.
And yet. So what is that one best way? How do we get kicked off for those people who don't intentionally?
It goes similar to, it goes to the starting part of our conversation is boundaries with people that you vibe with. I think the biggest thing when you're talking about building Guanxi is like, are you clear on your boundaries and intentions of how you choose to build relationships?
I like it. Now, let's remind people that the first and most important boundary that we talked about was 5 dinners. So boundaries aren't just about stay away. They aren't just about don't cross this line. Boundaries are also about, as I am bringing you in, this is the path that I'm going to bring you in on.
Yeah.
If you want to get close to me, if you want to take the next level with me, we're going to do 5 dinners.
Yeah. It's a friend quest. It doesn't have to be 5 dinners, but it's a friend quest.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. There's a friend quest involved. And not everyone has to pass a friend quest is also my thing. Some people, like, there's only so many people that you can fit on that 1 inch by 1 inch list. And people also ebb and fall off depending on person's mental health journey too.
Yeah.
Just because they got the privilege on 5 years ago doesn't mean they have the same privilege 5 years later.
Yeah. Completely appropriate. Maybe there's like a time horizon to the 5 dinners. Like every 2 months, one of your dinners has expired.
Well, it's just checking in with people, right? Like people go through deep self-discoveries. Like I had a friend who's like, I'm going through this deep self-discovery, and she's like, okay, now what? How do I build this business? And I'm like, you literally did this for like your last iteration of your business. Go back to those same people and update them. You already got the trust built. Why are you trying to do cold calling? Yeah.
Do you have any parting thoughts for us?
You are operating at your own unique pace. If you're watched all the way to the end, you've heard Lucas and I talk about how his podcast has evolved perfectly to the perfect time for this conversation, how my community is coming into fruition in the perfect time and perfect place. Those are each of our own unique paces and is not defined by society. It's defined by what we're aligned to. There's no right or wrong to that.
What a lovely message. Yeah. You're operating at your own unique pace. We all do.
And that's what makes you awesome.
Amazing. Roran, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for coming.
Of course. Thank you for having me and having a chance to nerd out about all the things. We've covered a lot of layers.
We've covered a lot of layers. We've peeled several layers off that onion.
Yes. Humans are like onions, and we've peeled off quite a few layers. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Elements of Community. Make sure to visit our website, elementsofcommunity.us, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.